well, so I will just quickly introduce myself. So I'm Igor Gifrin. I'm a sales engineer with Splunk. I'm located in Vancouver, BC, Canada, so quite a ways. I'm primary developer of the InfoSec app, and I hope that everyone in the room will find something interesting throughout kind of my quick talk about the app, why it came to be, and what it does, and how to dissect it, and all the things that are associated with this app. What I typically like to do is give a quick overview with a few slides why that app exists, what it does, and what it doesn't do. And then we'll jump into the app overview itself. So on the surface, the app is pretty self-explanatory. I will not be spending too much time jumping into every single dashboard, but I would rather concentrate on the what's happening under the hood with this app. But it is your meeting, so if you have any questions, if something is not clear, just don't hesitate to stop me at any time. All right, let's jump right into this. I'm sharing my browser, and you should be able to see this slide. Okay, so if you go to Splunk base, so you will easily find the InfoSec app. So it's free, anybody can download it. Pretty straightforward to install, and we'll cover those details as well. So why this app came to be? It may not necessarily be super relevant to anyone in the room who've been using security or doing security for many years, who is very versed with all the security tools and uses potentially enterprise security for your daily tasks. But for many organizations that just starting using Splunk for security, it gets overwhelming very quickly, right? So you talk to different vendors, everybody shows you very complex diagrams. There are tons of niche tools out there. It gets overwhelming very quickly. Just the sheer number of security players on the market is massive. So again, it's very easy to get information overload when you start kind of stepping back and thinking, where do I even start with Splunk for security? So this app is supposed to be addressing some of the gaps with those issues. So, and what I stole from one of my colleagues, this idea of crawl, walk, run with Splunk. So there's even another step, which is SOAR, which is SOAR being phantom. So it will be crawl, walk, run, SOAR. But in reality, we are somewhere around walking stage with the InfoSec app. And I will explain why and what the app does. So in a typical environment, if you just starting with Splunk for security, you have a choice of having Splunk Enterprise or Splunk Cloud, and basically picking a bunch of different point apps for firewalls, for antivirus, for Windows, for additional security tools. But those apps are pretty much, as you know, standalone, right? So you kind of need to build things from scratch to tie those pieces together. So the InfoSec app is your initial starting point where lots of pieces are already tied together. So it uses only core Splunk functionality. So there is nothing extremely fancy there. There is nothing. There is no JavaScript. At this point, there are no even lookups. So it means that anyone with basic understanding of how Splunk works can easily dissect this app and start using the app. And also, things that are important, especially when anyone starts with security with Splunk, is that where do I start? Which security data sources are important? So the app is focusing on very few, or rather handful of security data sources to get to the highest value. And we'll cover those data sources in a sec. So when I started designing the app, it almost came out of a little bit of frustration. So I could not really communicate clearly the message of how Splunk should be used for organizations that just started using Splunk for security, not jumping between 10 different apps, right? So the story was really inconsistent, and there was no single app to demonstrate how you can start with Splunk for security. So another thing is that I personally been with Splunk for over 4 years on and off. I worked with different types of organizations, right? So, and it sounds like in the room there's a mix of Splunk users that are very well versed with Splunk and use enterprise security. And I would guess that some of you in the room may be just starting with using Splunk for security, and that's why there's interest for this app. So with this app, there is no requirement to know SPL. It's really easy to go and dissect the app and make it your own. And most importantly, you can bring additional resources from things like security essentials. Another thing is, again, the idea of simplifying things for Splunk for security. I was attempting to make it almost as prescriptive as possible. So in most of the conversations with different kinds of organizations, I see a common pattern, right? So everybody wants to see what's happening in my environment on a single page, security posture, right? So then everybody wants to see what's happening in my Windows environment with my firewalls, with my malware solutions, with my network communication. So second step would be to look at continuous monitoring by security domain, like network authentication, intrusion detection. Then once you go past that, you look at advanced threat detection. And there are examples of advanced threat detection in the app as well. And obviously, it's not enough just staring at the dashboards. You want to have some capabilities to investigate what's happening in the environment. So step 4 would be investigation. And this is how the menu in the app is structured as well. Also, in many cases, security projects are not pure security projects. They are driven by initial compliance requirements. That's where organization is forced to go to basically comply with a specific regulation. Security kind of comes hand in hand because you're bringing data sources that will satisfy the compliance requirements, but you can use the same data sources for security use cases. And another thing that I consistently see is that, especially in the teams that are smaller and they are asking for more money for security tools, it's constant struggle to kind of justify the existence to the rest of the organization. So why do you need that much money to spend on security tools? So from that perspective, executive dashboard is part of the InfoSec app as well. And the other things is just straightforward health of the app and stats of the app, something that keeps you going with understanding whether everything is in line with what you expect. So this one will be probably a little bit more interesting. And will hopefully make more sense as we go into the app itself. So there is really a handful of data sources that every single organization would have, right? And what I'm talking about, it would be things like your domain controllers, your perimeter firewalls. In many cases, it will be some form of so-called new generation firewalls, right? So whether it's your Palo Alto, Cisco's, your Fortinets and things like that. And every single organization will have some form of antivirus or new generation antivirus in place. So, and those 3 data sources already are fantastic start just to understand what's happening in the environment from a security point of view. Obviously, it doesn't give you 100% of the coverage, but it gets you, I don't know, maybe 70% there, not boiling the ocean. And when we talk about things like firewalls and new generation firewalls, I have some examples on the right-hand side, and you probably recognize the usual suspects, right? So your Checkpoint, Cisco, Fortinet, Palo Altos. AD/LDAP would be Active Directory, whether it's your basically on-prem or Azure Active Directory. Antivirus, anything that you have in your environment, Symantec, McAfee, Trend, Anomaly. Also, lately, I started adding endpoint data. And with endpoint, it can be things that are commercial products like Carbon Black. It can be your OS Query. It can be your Sysmon from Microsoft. And what Splunk does on the left-hand side, and some of you are very familiar with this concept of data models. Network traffic, network sessions, authentication, intrusion detection, malware, changes, and endpoint data models. So all those data sources easily map to those data models. So, and we step away from kind of the data sources itself, but look at what's happening with my network traffic, what's happening with my authentication attempts. We step away from individual devices, systems, and we look at kind of bigger picture right away. It saves tons of time, allows us to see what user has done, for example, across all the systems that we feed authentication information from. And this covers massive amount of ground, not, again, boiling the ocean. I will pause here just to see whether it makes sense so far and whether there are any questions.
Any questions? Because I know I'd like to take the Nessa scans that I do, bring these in to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, so good question. So, and this is probably a good point in time to kind of break it down between the InfoSec app and things like enterprise security, right? So InfoSec app is in no way your substitution for basically full-blown security solution like enterprise security. So at this point, InfoSec app doesn't even have a dashboard for vulnerability scanning results. So this is something that you would want to bring into kind of as a next step, as your run step versus a walk step. And enterprise security, as some of you know, has all those dashboards, correlation searches that take advantage of vulnerability scanning results. Does it answer your questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So again, and just keep in mind that InfoSec app is your kind of free starting point with Splunk for security. But what it gives you, if you are not ready to jump directly into enterprise security, it has many similar concepts with especially data models and accelerated data models. So the data that is used in InfoSec app is the same data and is in the same shape or form that you would use for enterprise security. So it's another thing to think about. InfoSec app can be your stepping stone towards enterprise security if you are not jumping all the way to enterprise security right now. Right, let's see what else I have here. Yeah, so InfoSec app implementation. So if you haven't tried InfoSec app, it's really, installing the InfoSec app itself takes about 5 minutes. Where the time is spent is actually data onboarding. And you're familiar with basically how to bring data into Splunk. Additional step that you need to make sure is in place is making sure that you bring data in a SIM compliant, common information model compliant way. So it means that use your add-ons for Cisco, for Palo Alto, for Windows logs and things like that. So once it's SIM compliant, the rest of the implementation of the InfoSec app is very straightforward. So all you have to do is just install 3 add-ons: your common information model add-on, free add-on from Splunk base, 2 visualization add-ons, and we'll see it in the demo what those are. You need to manually accelerate 6 data models, and basically that's it. So there is really no configuration that is required in the InfoSec app itself. So this is another kind of way to think about it. So if you're not ready to jump into enterprise security, you have smallish environment with a handful of data sources, the InfoSec app is your easy starting point. And as you start using the InfoSec app and you see that I want to do more, you can start thinking about enterprise security to get the additional. Sorry, is there a question?
Nope.
Okay, so let's jump maybe to the demo here. And I should have this guy open. Yeah, so you should be able to see the InfoSec app screen here. So some of the things are relatively self-explanatory. I will just dissect some of the things that are happening under the hood. So with the InfoSec app, first thing I personally check is I go to health and stats, just to see what data comes into my environment and whether all the data sources are healthy. And I'm not looking at particular data sources. What I'm concentrating on is whether I have data sources hitting my data models. And you can see that from data models perspective, your authentication data model, that's where your Windows logs will go, for example. Change analysis, again, can be Windows security logs. Endpoint optional, depending on whether you decide to feed endpoint data from day one. Intrusion detection, again, if you have your IDS, IPS, whether it's host-based or it's part of your firewall, that will be there. Malware, anything that your new generation firewall picks up or your antivirus picks up will be there. Network session, network traffic would be, again, network communication events. So, and kind of stepping back, I just want to share with you kind of my experience working with quite a number of organizations that have brought InfoSec app in their environment. I was on quite a few kind of support calls for the InfoSec app, and in 100% of the cases, it boils down to basically 2 scenarios when the InfoSec app doesn't work. So the most common one that covers about 90% is when the data is not brought in with the common information model compliant add-on. So, and if you think about it, if it's not brought in with common information model compliant add-on and the app relies on normalized data from SIM add-on, nothing lights up, right? So, and the first step is just go back and onboard the data properly. Second scenario is just straightforward, simple things, not reading the docs, right? And I keep it as simple as possible. Literally, the documentation is boiled down to half a page on Splunk base. If you go to the details tab on Splunk base, it gives you 2 or 3 paragraphs over the instructions what to do with the app. And let's go there for a second. InfoSec app. So this is literally all the instructions that you care about. And it just talks about bring this 3 types of data sources: your firewall, your Active Directory, your antivirus. Install these 3 add-ons and accelerate these data models. So, and that's it. So the rest will light up automatically. Let's go back to the app. So, and again, you'll see this kind of almost prescriptive approach, right? So look at the security posture, look at your continuous monitoring based on kind of the domain of your environment, IDS, malware, Windows, all authentications, network traffic. And I separated Windows access from the rest of access just because most of the organizations spend significant amount of time basically chasing locked out accounts, privilege escalations, changes on the accounts and things like that. So, and there's lots of work is done primarily on Windows data. So there's a dashboard specifically for that. Then there are advanced use cases, and we'll take a look at some of the examples in a minute. Then there's investigation capability, a bunch of compliance example dashboards mapped to most common compliance regulations, and we'll take a look at those guys too. Executive dashboard and alerts. So let's start from this guy. So security posture. Again, this is relatively straightforward, and there is not much complexity here. I will break it down. So those high severity intrusion alerts come directly from your IDS or IPS. So whether it's basically your perimeter firewall with IDS IPS, or you have your host-based IDS IPS, infections coming from your malware data. Again, if you have your antivirus in place, so that would be the place. Signatures, again, from the same place. These stats are picked up directly from all the data, right? So how many hosts are reporting to your environment and how many accounts you see in the past 24 hours. Then similarly to kind of enterprise security, but significantly simplified, you have your intrusion alerts here broken down by severity, and this information comes from your IDS. And again, things over time. This on the bottom of the page is a little bit more interesting because, again, keeping it simple, kind of not going into extremely sophisticated analytics on your environment. Here, we're taking advantage of all the common information model compliant data and just figuring out the patterns. Like, for example, this is kind of noisy demo environment, but in your environment, for example, you may see significant spikes of the events, for example, or changes, right? And maybe something that you want to dive deeper into. Or, for example, significant spike in failures. And those are just tags from the events that are basically common information model compliant are used here. So pretty straightforward. And this is the first visualization that is required, excuse me, for the common information model. And this is, again, is free visualization from the from Splunk base. Another thing here is that unlike many other Splunk apps that you've seen, one of my kind of simplification goals is that if you click on something here, it will not take you to kind of a wall of SPL. It will take you to most likely another dashboard or simplified Splunk search. And this is just an example. If I click on this guy, it will take me to the dashboard that shows my intrusion detections. And for anyone who used Splunk for more than a week, this is really pretty straightforward, right? So you have your just visualizations of what's coming from your IDS IPS, but you can also do some filtering. Like, for example, okay, so show me, do I have any critical IDS alerts on allowed connections, right? So no, I don't, but I have high severity. Here they are. If I click on any of those, it will take me to the actual raw event that shows me what that event is. So not doing kind of harbor cruise around the dashboards, because you can definitely play with those dashboards on your own in your environment. I just want to highlight other things here. So if we look at Windows environments, the idea is pretty much similar. So we're visualizing here, well, it's the environment. Somebody really insists on changing it. Let's update this guy. So if we look at our Windows data. And this is really nothing more in this case as your Windows security logs. But even with those logs, you can get massive, massive value. So you can see your locked out accounts, you can see your privilege escalations, you can see your kind of breakdown of successful failed logons over time. But most importantly, just the patterns of account changes. And also, if you want to dive deeper, you can see all the interesting things in terms of authentications across your Windows environment. And there is a similar dashboard available for just overall authentication. Like, for example, if you have a bunch of Linux or other authentication mechanisms in your environment as well. And just like this, you can pick up some interesting parameters here. Let's say, show me all the failed authentications against, let's say, more than 50 hosts and who those users are. I can see that there's a guy called E. Belford here. I can see where the source and destinations are, and I can basically visualize the machines that that user logged into. And this is the second add-on visualization that is required. Again, it's a free one. And if you use Splunk Cloud, again, both add-ons are supported in Splunk Cloud as well. So I saw quite a few organizations implementing the InfoSec app in Splunk Cloud as well. So, yep.
The Windows lockouts and the failures, is that only looking at the Windows event ID, or is that also looking at the Kerberos lockouts and failures?
Yeah, so this one looks at event IDs.
Okay.
Yeah, and also, again, just stepping back, so this is kind of the basics, right? So if you want to modify things, really everything kind of your, just apply your regular Splunk knowledge, right? So you can open it in search, you can basically modify it. But under the hood, it's basically straightforward things like, so this guy is probably the easiest one. So it doesn't even use your data model acceleration. But you can basically modify it any way you want to. And also for any kind of investigation, if you see something like, for example, this E. Belford that failed tons of authentications, plus there's privilege escalation, you can go and jump into investigation right away, right? So, and again, without going too far, clicking anywhere, doing fancy SPL, we'll jump into yet another dashboard. So this is handy for anyone who is just learning Splunk, right? So for some of you, it will be too simplistic, maybe still convenient, but too simplistic. But for anyone who kind of is a little bit shy of using SPL, so this is very handy. So you can see basically what that user has done in the environment, all the account changes. This is noisy demo environment. Again, communications. And I even brought some of the kind of most recent raw events on to the surface, so you don't have to hunt for those as well, especially for anyone who is just starting with Splunk. But under the hood, again, your regular Splunk logic applies. So there is no JavaScript. Your dashboards can be modified any way you modify your current dashboards. Let's jump to, let's do network traffic as the last example of kind of simple things before we jump to some advanced threats. Again, this is really straightforward, right? So anything that your network events have to say coming from anything that you collect from hosts, your perimeter firewalls, any firewalls, blocked, allowed, and again, filtering is pretty easy as well. So you click on blocked, it shows up filtered results. Other things you can see here, again, these communication patterns here as well. I like to kind of go into specific protocols. This guy pulls data from Palo Alto, but anything that has information about applications or protocols can do the same trick for you. So for example, if my organization does not allow BitTorrent or allows BitTorrent, but basically it's not in line with the policy. I can see who is my largest consumer of BitTorrent on the network, and so on and so on. So kind of interesting things to poke around, again, at very kind of in a very simple manner. So and jump into access anomalies. This is kind of a mix of something that kind of a collection of things taken from Security Essentials. And if you are not familiar with Security Essentials, again, I encourage you to go to Splunk-based download Security Essentials. Fantastic menu of 300 plus use cases. So for example, spike of number of hosts accessed in last day. So somebody goes to, let's say, 5 hosts on average, and then suddenly there's a couple of standard deviations away from that number. So this will be lighting up, brute force attack, bunch of failed logins followed by a successful one. This one is slightly more sophisticated with geographically improbable access. And that's where you can get pretty fancy with kind of learning Splunk, right? So this is probably the fanciest SPL in this app. Most of them are limited to somewhere non-highlighted areas. So you can see accelerated data models are used very heavily. And one of the reasons for this is that even though I was making all the attempts to keep the app as simple as possible, you cannot really get away without accelerated data models if you want to work in kind of decently sized production environment, right? So you are throwing millions, if not billions, of events at Splunk per day, and you don't want to wait for kind of regular non-accelerated data model or regular Splunk search to give you results over the past 24 hours. It just takes quite a while and becomes less usable if you have to wait for a few minutes for results to come back. With accelerated data models, and specifically with T-stats, you can definitely do things much, much faster. And also it gives you this kind of learning opportunity to poke around and see how accelerated data models work. Let me just go back to my IDS stuff, and I will share with you, for example, let's open this guy in search. So if you want to kind of borrow this string, so this is another place to start, right? So just this guy takes a look at accelerated data model and picks up everything that has severity of IDS attack critical, right? And this is something that you can use anywhere, right? So, and the same logic applies, again, if you are just learning accelerated data models. Anyway, going back to this dashboard with access anomalies, geographically improbable access, where somebody logs in, for example, from, let's pick here, like from France and China, all within a short period of time. And you've seen those use cases before, especially for anyone who uses enterprise security. It's one of the dashboards there, but it happens to be here as well. So, but most importantly, when you run out of advanced use cases that you care about, just by all means, bring your own, right? So, and Splunk Security Essentials is the way to go for the menu of additional security use cases. A couple of other points here, and we will be done with this demo. Compliance. It's not necessarily everything that covers all your compliance requirements, but it's a good starting point. So it gives you 3 use cases with account monitoring control, maps it to NIST, PCI, HIPAA, NERC, ISO, and even critical security controls. So it gives you this dashboard that you can immediately use. Similarly, with boundary defense, maps it to the most common laws regulations, malware defenses. So It doesn't cover all use cases, but it gives you a good starting point, so you're not starting from scratch. Finally, something that for most of you in the room should be extremely simplistic and boring, but this is something that I constantly see being requested by execs that are trying to figure out what's happening, why we're spending that much money on security in the organization. Just regular things like attacks stopped, malware blocked, user protected, device protected, trend lines, how many users we have in the environment over time, how much traffic we're getting from what countries we are attacked. This is not super practical for security analysts, but it's something that communicates the message, okay, so we are under constant attack, we're defending against all those attacks. If we, for example, have a trend of users jumping up, so we can basically ask for more resources, saying we need to buy a bigger firewall, larger Splunk license, or hire more security people. So this is easier to explain to the executives what we do on the security side of the house. And this is kind of it, that what I wanted to share with you. We'll jump back to the rest of this deck, which is literally just one last slide here. And this is kind of an encouragement to just jump into it, go to Splunk base, download this app, install those 3 add-ons or 2 add-ons if you have common information model already in place, and play with the InfoSec app with your own data.
All right, thank you. Anybody have
Are there any questions? Yeah, sorry.
Doesn't look like it. Looks like they just want to get and play with it. I know. Are you looking at making maybe redoing some of the dashboards so they're the cloud gateway mobile friendly and like the Splunk TV friendly?
Yeah, so I tried that. So basically, some of the dashboards will work out of the box, but definitely some of the more sophisticated visualizations will not. So, I played with it a little bit. So there is no immediate kind of plan to do that, but please keep me in kind of in the loop. So if there is enough demand for that, so this should not be a big stretch to have a set of dashboards that work flawlessly with the cloud gateway.
Great. Thank you for your time and sharing of your knowledge.
Excellent. So I appreciate, thank you for inviting me. So you have my contact information. So if you have any questions on the app, don't hesitate to reach out. So I'm always interested to hear your feedback on how you use the app in production.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.